This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity. Joining us today is Catherine Johns. When it comes to communication, Catherine Johns wrote the book and did the radio show and gave the talk. Catherine's audience benefits from her years of experience on the stage and in the studio. What do you say about yourself, your work, and the value you offer? And how do you say it? And how are you perceived while you say it? Catherine offers a practical path to making a stronger impression when you speak in a meeting, on a conference call, at a rally, or anywhere else. She's a catalyst for compelling communication, and Catherine can show you how to create more impact to achieve greater success.
In our conversation with Catherine, she gives us some great tips for showing up well in all those virtual meetings we're in and in person, either facilitating a discussion or giving a formal presentation.
Welcome, Catherine Johns.
Catherine, thank you so much for joining our community.
It is my pleasure to be here.
So Tom and I recently released an episode with Ann Latham, who is known as the Queen of Clarity. And we talked a lot in that discussion about meetings, mostly about what we do wrong in meetings. And it was all framed around the perspective of that we go to these meetings and we talk about the right things sometimes, and rarely will we reach the right outcomes. So I wanted to talk to you, knowing that you are an expert with presence and showing up well, rather than talking about the clarity of an agenda and making sure that we are talking about the right things. Can we talk a little bit about being in meetings and, from your perspective, how we show up in them and how we show up better?
Absolutely. So where do we start? Because that is a very big question, Adrian.
Why don't we start, since now more of our meetings and engagements are in this virtual Zoom setting? What are some of the common mistakes that you recognize with your clients and coach them to do differently specific to the virtual setting?
Okay, that's great. So a couple of things, and right off the bat, it's about how do I position myself in front of a camera? Even as long as we've been doing Zoom now, you still see people who are kind of shrunk down like this, so you see their head kind of on the bottom of the screen and there's a bunch of space up there, or they're laying back like that. So they're not filling the screen nicely. You want to be center screen, usually, unless you have something specific like a visual aid that you're going to show over your shoulder. You might move to the side, but in general, you want to be center stage, just as you would in front of a room. So that means the center of the frame, a little bit of headroom, but not too much, and enough of your body that we can see that you're a whole human and not a disembodied head. And if you move your hands up a little bit, you'll be able to use them to convey information or just to add energy to what you're saying.
I would like to mention something I heard you say before, which we've all experienced, and that is being concise and purposeful. And the example you gave this time was the facilitator or whoever was leading it said, we're just going to take a few minutes to introduce ourselves. And you talked about a person, and I like your eyes there squinching. This person may have been very interesting human being who you would have loved to have coffee with, but you had a meeting and he was going on, and most of it you weren't interested in. So talk a little bit about clarity, since Adrian already introduced that theme, and concise.
So on virtual platforms in particular, concise is really important. You know, attention spans are short, no matter where we are and what the context is. When we're staring at a video screen, they are especially short. So the truth is, people can absorb 20, 30, maybe 40 seconds of what you say if you're pretty compelling. And then they start to zone out. And you might get them back, but you want to be sure that you get your most important point in there in a really short amount of time, shorter than you might expect. And it will feel like you haven't really talked that long, but the rest of the group is already drifting off to what am I having for lunch? Or, you know, what am I picking up my kid at after school? How is that going to, or that argument I had over the breakfast table this morning with my spouse, right? There's a million things on their minds about their personal lives and their business, and you're competing with all of them. So you want to compete quickly and with some level of being compelling and interesting.
Is it okay to interrupt if you're the facilitator within a meeting setting and someone's blathering on? How do you politely interrupt to get them to move on?
I have to say, sometimes I'm not polite, but I try to be. I really do.
Direct, we call it, Catherine. You are direct.
I am direct.
Always kind.
And sometimes it is necessary to just jump in and say, usually you can find a phrase like, thanks, we're short of time, so we need to move on. Or that was great, and we're going to talk about this next. Or something that kind of signals, look, I'm not just cutting you off to be mean. We have an agenda, we have a time frame, and we've got to move on. One thing that helps everybody in a meeting, and you've noticed me doing it already, is when you get to the end of what you're going to say, stop talking. Put your lips together like that, because that's a signal to the facilitator. Okay, I'm done. You have the floor. Some people worry that there will be what they refer to as an awkward pause. The pause is not awkward. The pause is welcome. The people watching this actually like that moment when I stop talking and then somebody, one of you, says something else. That shift, that breathing room is really welcome for the listener.
Can you prepare for impromptu?
Sure, you can think ahead about what are the likely things that might come up. What questions are people apt to have about your subject matter? What experience is somebody likely to share? And then you kind of have to be ready to roll with it. That is one of the values of live meetings, that there is that moment of unexpected. And when things happen that are unexpected, handling them gracefully is part of the art of being in a meeting.
When we first started with all of the Zoom meetings, we were thrust into, this virtual setting. I felt very uncomfortable in front of the camera, right? It was so different from sitting in a conference room where you're not seeing a mirror image of yourself right in front of you, right? And you can just have the conversation and you are able to read the nonverbal cues. It's so much harder to read nonverbal cues if your audience is even on camera, right? Many times there's a mix where people stay off camera, so you don't even have the benefit of some kind of nonverbal cues. How do we get that back in this virtual setting? And maybe this comes from your radio days of not being able to see your audience then.
Well, I was just about to say, Adrian, have you ever had a phone conversation?
That's true. We're not new to that.
All day, every day, right? And you're actually very used to reading the verbal cues when they are not accompanied by visual cues. Is it as full or as rich an experience as when we can see each other? No, it's not. You're right. There's an element missing when we can't really study the person's face. And many of us are very comfortable and very efficient at phone conversations or meetings where we're in a room and somebody is in a different room and they're on one of those starfish phones in the middle of the table, teleconferences. And people still have those once in a while. More often now we use video. But if you draw on the skills you developed doing those conversations, it's really the same thing.
Well, Adrian mentioned your radio experience, and I remember the first time I heard you say, of course, you didn't have the words. I was doing virtual presentations for a long time without the words. So my question to you is, how do you personalize it? There you are in a room, in a studio, and you can't see your audience, but you don't want to talk to a general audience.
No, I don't. I talk to one person. And I did this on the radio, and I do it when I'm talking through the camera. And so let me say that one thing about, think of yourself, and Adrian, this goes back to what you were saying about being uncomfortable. Think about yourself talking through the camera as if the person you're talking to is just right there on the other side of it. So it's not just talking into the ether, or it's not talking at a camera or at a screen, but through it to the person. And that's exactly what I did in a radio studio. And I literally imagined a person, a listener. And depending on the subject matter of the show, it might be a different listener, Bob from Berwyn or Nora from North Aurora or whoever, right? One of those people, I imagine them in my mind right on the other side of the mic. And here I am talking to them. And even having that mental picture softens the voice and makes it sound more like a conversation and less like an announcement. And I think that's the tone we want for most of our virtual meetings.
Yeah, that's true. It's all about the conversation. And yet too often we feel like we're in this presentation mode where, especially if we're showing slide decks, like I have so many business meetings where I have to display information. And so now I become an even tinier window.
Yes.
Because I'm displaying a slide of some kind or some kind of visual. And I'm in presentation mode, and I can just keep on going and forget to pause because I know exactly what I want everybody to hear. Right. And I want to influence towards a certain decision, but I forget to pause and get that feedback. And it really is still a dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really helps, as I said a minute ago, to firmly stop so that it's a signal. Now it's your turn. Right. So you might say that. I mean, you might say, what questions do you have? Or how do you feel about that? Or does that make sense? Or are you with me? I mean, you might use a check-in phrase like that. And in addition to that, you want to come to a firm stop yourself, because that's a nonverbal signal that they have the floor now.
I know you do a lot of work on confidence. Talk a little bit about diminutive language and ways in which we are dismissive of ourselves.
Oh my goodness, this is a big topic. A couple of things. People are prone to ask questions that are like questioning themselves in a way. So as if they're not sure that they've made their point. And I know I just said, invite somebody in with a question. A little of that goes a long way. And you don't want to get in the habit of tagging everything you say with a question in words or in tone, which means ending a sentence like this, where it sounds like a question, even though you mean it as a statement, because it confuses your listener. Because now I can't read the signal. The words sound like a statement, but the tone makes it sound like you're not sure of what you're saying. And that discordant note confuses people, and it makes them think you are less confident than you might actually be. So that's one thing. And then there's language like little small, I have a little idea. I just want to say, maybe we could, all of that padding reduces the impression that we are confident about what we're saying and that we're making a direct recommendation or suggestion. If I frame it as a my little idea or my little program or my little project, it reduces the importance of it in everybody's mind, mine and everybody else's. So those are words that we're better off to use out unless we have a specific reason to soften. And sometimes there is that. We're talking to somebody who we really want them to think this was their idea. And so we might intentionally make it sound more about them than about us, or reduce the impact of our language. But most of the time, those things we default to minimizing language or language that reduces our importance when it doesn't serve us well.
I see women do this a lot, especially.
Yeah, it's very, very common. And men who are in certain fields, social work, for instance, HR, men in those fields tend to do the same thing, maybe just because they work with so many women that they pick up those habits. I don't know. But I do know I've noticed that. Whereas investment bankers, they don't question themselves as they deliver their information, usually.
Is there something that you can do as you prepare for whatever kind of engagement that you're embarking on, where that you can physically position yourself? You talked a little bit about being on screen and making sure that you're, showing your whole self, so you look like a whole person. But is there something physically that you can do to prepare that confidence, to kind of build that confidence in your stance or superhero pose or something like that?
Yeah. So when you're sitting and let me just say, for most of us, we do meetings sitting. If you're presenting at a virtual meeting, you may well want to stand up. And I know people who prefer that because they feel more energized standing. You might have a standing desk, or if you don't, an ironing board is a great substitute because the height of it is adjustable and you can put your laptop on that and set it to the right height to do a standing presentation. My preference is to sit, and I feel comfortable that I am confident and strong from a seated posture. So that's something for each of us to consider. Either way, you want to be firmly grounded. So if I'm sitting in front of my laptop, my feet are flat on the floor. I don't have my knees crossed or my ankles crossed. I'm not sprawled in the chair. My feet are flat on the floor, and I am actually sensing my feet touching the floor. So I have a solid base. My seat is firmly in the chair, so I'm not leaning off. Like, notice the difference when I just shift onto one side. There's a time for this, but when I'm delivering information and wanting to come across as confident, that's not the time. So both of my sit bones are firmly grounded, and my upper body is straight up and down. I'm not bent. I'm not leaning in like this, and I'm not touching my face. You notice the difference when I do that it seems like maybe a listening pose or maybe thoughtful. It doesn't sound like this woman is about to give us a recommendation that we should pay attention to. So I'm like this, and I am breathing all the way down into my belly. So I can feel, singers are familiar with diaphragmatic breathing. You're breathing so your belly moves in and out. You might feel your side body move in and out, or your back even. And it feels good, doesn't it? And it makes me realize when I try that, how easy it is to sort of tense up. So here I am talking, and I'm feeling my body pull in, and I'm not breathing as much. I'm leaning in toward the camera, getting a little intense. I'm stretching out here, and my voice becomes thinner, less rich. Whereas if I come back to this grounded posture where I'm straight up and down and my chest is open, you want to feel that openness across here. And the breath is in and out. Now my voice sounds different, and I expect you all can hear it. I know that I can hear it.
Well, we talked about a person going on and on about their work. How do you help people to talk about what they do in a concise way and without boring people, to talk effectively? Because people do want to know what you do, but as it's relevant to them.
And that's the key, Tom. They want to know what you could do for them or for somebody they care about. They are not interested in the ins and outs of your business or your daily routine or the services you provide. They are interested in the impact of those services. And so the way to talk about my work to be interesting is to frame it by making it about them. So I actually teach workshops about how to introduce yourself. And it's a whole process that begins not with me, but with the people I serve. Right off the bat, I start with their situation. What is the problem they face? Or, I use the language, what is the pickle that they're in? And then if they didn't have that problem, what would that be like? So it's the people, the pickle, the promised land for them, and only then my path that would get them from their pickle to their promised land. So I don't start off with, I'm a speaker and a coach, and I help individuals be more effective communicators, and I've been in business forever, and I'm certified, blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares about that. They could not be less interested. But if I start out and say, sometimes it's challenging, isn't it, to stand up in front of a networking group and talk about your work, and you might get the sense that nobody's listening, or you might feel nervous, like you get tense in here, or your face gets red. What if you could talk to groups really easily and comfortably about the work you do so that they're interested enough to want to work with you? Well, that's how I can help you. So do you see how I set out who they are? They're people who network. What is their pickle? They get nervous and they don't know what to say. What would it be like if the words just flowed out of their mouth and they were comfortably and easily telling us all why we need them? Now I can help you do that. And that's a quick coaching program, or that's a workshop, or that's whatever. That's all I'm saying about it. And then I would come back and, maybe offer a little bit of proof. I do this all the time. The last time I worked with a client on this, she did X, Y, or Z. Or I spoke to a group and 42 of them delivered flawless elevator speeches after that, or something that backs up what I've just said I do. And you need to do all of that quickly, concisely, and without repeating.
Start with the story, start with the problem, tell
Yes.
the story, help them envision what that could look like, what better could look like.
Yeah. And in
Yes.
our world, what she just did was conversational. One of the problems with elevator speeches, even if they're well constructed by a formula that touches all the bases Catherine just touched, it feels like something they would never say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And my experience is that most of us have a challenge with that. Sounding conversational when you're not, in fact, having a conversation is not so easy. And it really takes practice. It also helps if you're in a group of people in a room, or if you're on a screen, it helps to create an awareness of the people you're talking to. So if you're in a room, you want to be looking at those people. If you're on a screen, if you're working virtually, you're probably looking through the camera, but you want to have that mental image of a person right on the other side, as if you're talking to that person, you're not delivering a speech. Nobody wants to hear a speech. Even people who go to events to hear speakers don't want to hear speeches anymore. They want conversations.
And that resonates with us very much.
I'm sure, because it's tied into the work that you do. Mm-hmm. I want to go back, if I could, to one thing about from the very beginning when you talked about positioning yourself in front of the camera. One thing I've been working with some clients on it, and I did a workshop just recently, and we saw people for the first session, and then when they came back for the second session, what a difference it made. Positioning ourselves in front of the camera, and particularly being at the right height, where there's a little bit of headroom over, but not a lot. That was a piece of it. And the other thing was curating the background just a little bit. We're not movie directors, and we don't have to create a set, but we do want to be thoughtful about what people are seeing of us. I'm in favor of, I hate this word, authenticity, which is people seeing you in your natural habitat. Here I am, busy speaker at work in her office. This is what my office looks like. All right, I will concede that plant, if it lived there, the door would slap into it every time I come in and out. It lives across the hall in the back.
You do a little curating.
I did a little curating. I brought it in because there was too much white space there and it just needed a little something, and plants are always good. So this is not fancy, it's not perfect, but it is mine. And when I invite you into my office virtually, you're seeing the real thing. Personally, not a fan of the blurred background or the canned backgrounds that you can put on Teams or Zoom or probably any of the platforms now, where you're on a desert island or whatever. Two things: unless you have a very good camera, you use one of those backgrounds, virtual backgrounds, and you get that thing where it looks like somebody took a bite out of your head, and every time you move, you see this.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's distracting. And even the blurred background. Well, I had a conversation with a high-ranking client who likes the blurred background, partly, I think, because when he's on Zoom with people who report to him, he doesn't necessarily want everybody seeing whatever's in the room, right? He got very comfortable with the blurred background. And I said, ditch it, because what it does is make us wonder what you're hiding. Like, let us see your office. What's the big deal? And he kind of poo-pooed the whole thing. And then somebody in the company, even higher ranking than him, said, I don't like those blurred backgrounds. What are you hiding anyway? I felt vindicated, and he got rid of his blurred background. So I know some people prefer them. I don't arm wrestle you over it. But if you're asking my advice, a clean, crisp background that's real beats virtual backgrounds or blurred backgrounds any day of the week.
Thank you.
I think too, it's your leadership style, right? If it's again, back to what do you want to portray? How do you want to encourage your people to behave? And if you aren't willing to show some of that vulnerability of, I've got a pile of papers behind me stacked up and it's messy. They're not filed yet. They're not put away. But I'm here with you, right? Right now with you, not filing papers. You do the same.
Yes. And some of that is, I look like there's work happening here.
Yeah.
So because it's a working meeting, right? It's not, we're not putting on a stage show. We're inviting people into our office if we have an office. And if we don't, it's our kitchen table. A really good resource for this kind of thing. There's a Skype account called Rate My Skype Room, at Rate My Skype Room. And it's a married couple, I believe, and both of them, but especially the guy, watch television and rate people's Skype rooms, the people who appear as expert commentators on news shows. And back in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of messy stuff going on. People have gotten very sophisticated about curating their background. One of the things I've noticed is you see more and more people showing up from their kitchen. Somehow kitchens have become trendy, but their kitchen doesn't look anything like mine. There are no dishes sitting out on the countertop. They have a pineapple and a cookie jar and whatever else. But it's a great resource to get some clues about how to arrange your own background so it's neat and presentable, but not distracting.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And please tell the audience how they can contact you. And we will put it on the website as well, Annie.
Fabulous. I am at catherinejohns.com. There's a surprise. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with you there. I post usually 4 or 5 days a week about business communication and the kinds of things we've been talking about today. So that's a great place to get to know each other and have a dialogue.
And I'll put in a plug for you. When you go to catherinejohns.com, subscribe, because Catherine continuously puts out actionable insights in stories that are just things that all of us are experiencing, but with her unique, how can you use this to be a better communicator?
Perfect. And thank you for that. I put a lot of work into that.
And I didn't call it your little thingy, but now that I did, you have to tell that story. And it ties back to what you said about diminutive language. So please do tell that story.
Yes. Somebody said one time, I love your little thingy, meaning my newsletter. And I said, little thingy? I sit down Oh my God, I sit down every week and write carefully and thoughtfully. And I have been doing that since September of 2014, 2017. Anyway, a long time, 2014. It's a long time already. And I have never missed a Wednesday, even when Christmas fell on Wednesday. And I take it very seriously. And I love the feedback I get. And to have this woman say, I read your little thingy every week, I was like, what the hell? So that's an example of how we can diminish somebody else's work or our own by using language that makes it seem small. So make your work big. And while you're at it, make mine big too.
What a great way to end. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.